Question: how do I respond when my brother defends Muslims by saying it's their interpretation of Islam when referring to, for example, to Surah 5 verse 32? Muslims in our media in Europe always claim killing was forbidden in Islam, and some of them refer to this verse. This makes people think that it's a legitimate interpretation of that verse. I've shown this verse to my brother and he said I couldn't understand that verse in a peaceful way, yet he keeps saying that Muslims are able to interpret the verse as peaceful. So there are two issues here. One is how people are capable of interpreting verses, and the other is what the verses are actually saying. And I'll just say here, any Muslim can interpret any verse of the Quran however he wants. So that's not the issue we're talking about here. We're talking about what the verses are actually saying. So that's the real issue we would be concerned about. What is the Quran actually saying? Because again, any Muslim can look at a verse of the Quran and say, this is what I want it to mean, or interpret it in light of what they already believe. And this isn't just Muslims. Christians can do this, Jews can do this. Anyone can interpret their books in light of what they already want to believe. The problem is that those texts actually have a meaning that if you're not trying to interpret it in light of what you already believe, then you start looking, what does this actually mean in the text of the Quran, in its historical context, and so on. And just to point out the problem, let me go ahead and read the verse. So the verse is very common, one of the most commonly quoted verses by the media to show that Islam is a religion of peace. But it says, the way it will be quoted is that the Quran says that if anyone killed a man, it's as if he has killed all mankind. And that sounds really, really peaceful. Let's read what it actually says. Chapter 5, verse 32 of the Quran. For this reason did we prescribe to the children of Israel, notice that this is a verse prescribed for the children of Israel, that whoever slays a soul, unless it be for manslaughter or for mischief in the land, it is as though he slew all men, and whoever keeps it alive, it is as though he kept alive all men. And certainly our apostles came to them with clear arguments, but even after that, many of them certainly act extravagantly in the land. So this says that this is a verse given to the children of Israel, and we actually know where this comes from. It comes from Mishnah Sanhedrin.
Of the Talmud.
Yeah, the Jewish Talmud. So this was a teaching of the Jews. Jews were quoting this to Muslims during this time, and Muhammad says, yes, this was revealed for the Jews. The next verse is revealed for Muslims, and it says, the punishment of those who wage war against Allah and His apostle and strive to make mischief in the land is only this, that they should be murdered or crucified, or their hands and their feet should be cut off on opposite sides, or they should be imprisoned. This shall be as a disgrace for them in this world, and in the hereafter they shall have a grievous chastisement. Notice, the very next verse condemns killing, but you've asked, hey, why can't Muslims interpret this, chapter 5, verse 32, to say that Islam has always condemned killing? Well, as a rule, if the very next verse commands killing in certain circumstances, namely you've committed the vague crime of making mischief in a Muslim land, then you just can't legitimately interpret it that way. Yes, you can interpret it that way. Again, anyone, you could read any of these verses and interpret them to mean whatever you want. And some people will say, well, since you can interpret these to mean whatever you want, well, therefore Islam can be peaceful because you can interpret it in a peaceful manner. The problem is, unless you just think that texts mean whatever anyone wants them to mean, which is a ridiculous idea. I mean, if you watch this video I'm posting and interpret it to mean something I obviously don't mean, yes, you can do that. You're capable of doing that. It can be done. But as Chris Rock once said, you can drive with your feet. It doesn't make it a good idea. All right? So what the text is saying is not Islam condemns killing, or even Islam condemns killing, in particular circumstances. Islam does condemn killing in certain circumstances, but this is calling for killing in a variety of circumstances, and it just makes no sense to go to the verse before it, where they're talking about a revelation for the children of Israel, and say that's what applies to Muslims, and the verse that comes right after it, which is revealed for Muslims, that one doesn't apply. That's a very odd way of interpreting text.
Yeah, I'd like to add a bit to that. I mean, I see where the question is coming from. I think about my family, who's very peaceful and peace-loving, And so to go up to one of them and to say, look at what the Quran says, it commands killing, they will almost always find a peaceful way to interpret it, and they will try to justify that. Part of the problem is you have a whole Muslim ummah. So you have a ton of Muslims, over 1.5 billion Muslims. When we're talking about Islam, we're not just talking about one person's interpretation. We're talking about a history of interpretation and how people are interpreting it today and how much that correlates to how it used to be interpreted. Now, here's the thing about Islam. Almost always, whenever you talk to a Muslim, they're going to tell you that they're following Muhammad. Very, very few Muslims are going to say, well, we just believe in Islam's general teachings and we're not going to follow Muhammad. So they all consider themselves followers of Muhammad. And then when you look at Muhammad's life and you see the tremendous amounts of violence in it, the last 10 years of his life, he saw over 80 battles waged. That's tremendous. And that's as soon as he can start fighting. The first time he has a fighting force, he starts launching battles at a rate of over 8 per year. That's the guy they're following. And now, at first, like me, I'm thinking, hey, Muhammad's really peaceful. But then when I open up the books and I discover this is what Muhammad was actually like, I then had to make a decision. Am I going to continue being a Muslim and follow Muhammad? And he's obviously not this peaceful guy I always thought he was. Or am I going to become nominal? Or am I going to become an apostate? So I kind of had a choice to make when I realized the reality of the violence of Islam. Some people, I went apostate. I decided to say, I'm not going to remain Muslim. Some people make the decision, no, we are going to radicalize. If this is what Muhammad taught, then this is what he taught, and I need to follow it. This is a lot of converts. If you notice, many of the crimes that are committed in the West are committed by people who've been converted to Islam, and they've been told this is the man you're following, and they get zealous and they commit these murders and these atrocities. So, just because you have some Muslims who are interpreting it peacefully, it doesn't mean that we shouldn't take a stand and say, no, this is what it actually has said, because those Muslims might realize it someday, and we ought to be there for them to help them know how to respond to this truth.